CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on CFL Talk. Joining me as usual is David Morassutti, and we have a very special guest coming out of Calgary, Mark Stephen. David, Mark, welcome to the program.
Welcome. Good to be here.
Always glad to have our friends from the West join us. Now it's a little easier when we go a little bit later at night.
Yeah, we're not in the afternoon, and during the season, it's really tough because our friends out West are actually watching practice and doing some interviews, so it makes them hard. Well, we're doing it at this time, and speaking of this time, it's an interesting time of year. There's a couple of topics that we'd like your opinion on, Mark, and bring us what's happening in the West. Let's start with this 4 down, 3 down thing that 3 Down Nation started. It's crazy because they wrote the story saying that there was a conversation with the betting site, the partner Genesis, with the league about going to 4 downs. Then they wrote an article saying, why doesn't Randy respond? After they wrote an article saying Randy responded and said there's nothing to it. I mean,
well, I hear where you're going with that, and do I think it was ever discussed? I do. They'd have to put everything on the table, but he could end all this stuff with about 10 words. It was discussed. It was rejected. We're a 4 down league. There, 10 words, done.
Or we're a 3 down league.
Yeah, that one too. You know what I'm saying, though, is
yeah.
Just say it. Don't talk that we're not going in that direction and this and that. Just say it. It's, if we had him on the show today and said, so we hear next year you're playing with 9 players, what would his response be? Come on, no chance.
Yeah.
Would the story stay alive?
No.
I'm just disappointed. I don't believe it's at the front of mind, but it's a third rail that has been exposed, and for some reason they just can't come out with a definitive, like I say, 10 word phrase just to end it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think the question is the third rail. I think that what the third rail has become, it's become the lack of commitment by the CFL to address issues that are raised, like just to come up and say, you know what, this ain't happening, forget about it. Or yes, we've been contemplating it. This goes back. It started with that XFL thing where it was we're having a conversation about conversations. What kind of answer is that? That's the kind of situation I think we've been in. And for those of us that are, for you that you're a media guy that gets paid to do what you do. Congratulations. I do this as a hobby because I love the game. David is halfway between you and where I'm at, and we all care about the game, and I think it's important that these issues be answered by the league so that the people like us who are passing information along help to clarify, what's going on. I'm not here to make up stories.
What a needless distraction.
Totally.
Needless and largely self-created. That's what's so frustrating for me. Not that these things are discussed or whatever, but you just got to be smart about it, right?
Yep.
So we'll see. Maybe they will. Maybe at a subsequent tour stop whenever they go. I know they've done Regina, Edmonton, and Calgary, so I don't know where the next one is. I know there are others planned, but maybe somebody will get them to actually just utter, like I say, 9 or 10 words on this topic. Definitive words.
Absolutely. So where do you stand on 3 or 4 downs?
And you know what?
It's
actually,
not a topic.
Dan Ralph actually put this up too, though, because is the league's problem the rules? I don't think so. I always said that the league's problem has never been the rules. The league's problem has been how are they presenting the game to the audience that they're trying to attract, right? How are you reaching out to this? And Dan Ralph was totally right. How are you reaching out to the younger demographic? Is the younger demographic clamoring for 4 down football? I don't personally think so. I just think they want a product that's attractive and gets them excited, right? That's what they all want.
A switch, I'll lay it right out here so nobody will mistake it. A switch to 4 down football would be the death knell of the CFL as we know it. They would chase away almost every one of their loyal current supporters and attract almost no new ones. So it's not even a discussion they should be. They can have it. I get it. But it's something that should be so far in the background and squashed.
I think you're totally right on that, Mark, because the last thing you want to do as a business is piss off the people who are paying your bills, because there are ways you can like I look at other sports leagues, I look at what other sports leagues have done to attract new fans. They haven't had to make changes to their rules. I mean, I like bringing up Formula One. We've kind of discussed this a little bit, but they didn't change the rule. They made changes to the rules that were already happening before the young people discovered it through Drive to Survive and other means. And I just think, like, if you're the CFL, you don't need to change the way you've played football because it's worked for how many years? It's worked for
Yeah.
decades, while every other league has tried these new look at what the XFL did before they had to call it a season. Look at what the Alliance American Football League had, tried to do to get people. And it's just it was never about the rules. It was about how people were attracted to the product that was on, like, how are you bringing in people versus the product that you're putting on the field. That's where I think the CFL, and I think this is where the discussion is a little misguided.
Mark, I think the fact that what I'll support in what you're saying is, and I think it's true from a different direction, is that if we become a 4 down league, we become the second best football league in North America. Right now, we're an independent idea, practiced differently with long routes, deep, wide, and long routes, and a game that is in itself sustainable. What isn't sustainable is a league like ours that requires people to turn the turnstiles to get them going around in circles and filling stadiums after 2 years of a pandemic that said you're not allowed to have customers. So, a lot of the concern that people have, I'm not suggesting that because the pandemic goes, the leagues are going to be in all great shape, because we all know before the pandemic came, there were issues in a lot of cities in the Canadian Football League. So, to David's point, it's about making the game something that people are willing to pay to go to see, because ultimately that's the bottom line, right, of the Canadian Football League, is having people
Mhm.
come to watch the game.
Well, certainly there's some core issues that shouldn't be discussed, and 3 down is one of them. At least change. You can discuss anything. Unlimited motion, 12 players on the field. I'm not saying the game can't be tinkered with. You mentioned the XFL. I wouldn't have a problem with the XFL's kick coverage rules. They had their kick return rules where the cover team lines up. I think it was the 35 in the XFL. You don't move till the ball is caught. That would save a lot of those injuries and guys running down the field and a little wear and tear. So I'm not opposed, but there's some things that are at the core that shouldn't be tinkered with, and those are them. Because I know it's everybody wants to attract new fans, et cetera, and I get it. It's the lifeblood of these franchises, but maybe just step back and take care of the ones you've got. Make sure that they're comfortable and on board with everything going on.
And the game just has to be played at its best.
Mhm.
That's really the problem, is that right now, I think we can all agree that the past couple of years, it hasn't been played, and it hasn't been played at its best through no fault of the league, no
Mhm.
fault of the players, no fault of the officiating. And these are all the regular people that we blame for the way the league's gone bad. It's not because of those things. That's why this year is so important. And we talk on this show, Mark, about the fact that there might not be enough money in there to help the return, you know, become more. They can promote the game, because money is required to
Oh
promote the
yeah.
game. Every team has suffered financially, so this is really tough. This may not be a quick turnaround. In other words, they have the money to go. Okay, we can all come to the stadium now. Let's go in, all hog, right? They can't do it money wise. Every team, even the ones that do really well, like yours and Edmonton and Saskatchewan and Winnipeg, a few of them aren't allowed to make a profit. So it's not like they have money,
Mhm.
waiting there. Even the teams that make money don't have money. That's the challenge the Canadian Football League has, and promotion costs money.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of it, no question about it. And you're right. Are people going to feel coming back to the stadium in the same numbers that they did before? The evidence now is with the National Hockey League. There's no crowd restrictions that I'm aware of anywhere, and in the Canadian markets, that's the only ones I can
Mhm.
speak to. They're having trouble filling the buildings, and not every single game. Maybe Toronto's an outlier, but every other team's having a bit of a trouble.
No, they're having issues here too. TFC, I watched. They called it a game that was sold out. Saw a lot of empty seats. So I don't know, David, how you feel about that. Is there something that I don't in
No,
that
well, I
regard?
think I also just think that people, it's the idea of I'm gonna pay all this money, I better get something entertainment value out of it, right? I don't think it's the idea of going to a sporting event. I think everyone loves to go to a sporting event. I look at the Blue Jays during the year; they don't usually get the same crowds as they do in September when everything is kind of on the line and the games mean something. I do think where you really truly gauge where a sports league does well is when the games are at the highest stakes, right? We saw it with the Canada soccer matches. Those games were sold out. Everybody was there because the stakes were high and the entertainment value from those games were really high as well. Like you're not going to a game expecting to not have a good time. And I think that's something the CFL is trying to do. Randy Ambrosie's trying to find out those ways to have those high scoring but also close games. I mean, it's a little hard to manipulate the game to go exactly how you want it to go, but there are ways that you can, encourage and market it as a league that's going to be entertaining to the final whistle. There's every game's going to be close, every game's going to mean something. And for the most part, CFL games are pretty close. It's just they're not close in the way that the CFL probably wants it, in that they're very close with low scoring affairs and a lot of field goals versus what we've seen in the past with a lot of touchdowns and a lot of lead changes late in games.
I think that's fair. I think last year was a bit of a reflection on multiple players changing teams, a shortened schedule. Never thought I'd say this, but I'd like to see a preseason game or two because the first couple of weeks were pretty raw and rocky. So yeah, there were some things that hopefully won't be in place with a traditional offseason now.
Mark, how do you feel about offense, defense, practice affects one part of the game more than another? And I can throw in special teams too.
Well, I would say probably practice on offense is the most important. They're all important naturally, but offense just because of the precise timing that's required on routes and on different plays, receiver sweeps, that kind of stuff, the intricate work that the offensive line has to do. They're all important, don't get me wrong, but probably a little more emphasis on offense because all 12 guys have to go the right way for a play to succeed in most cases. Not quite the same on the special teams and defense.
I agree with you 100%. David, how do you feel?
Yeah, I always say that, I always remember when a team brings in like a receiver or a running back, they don't get in right away. They're not the ones that are going to be put in the first, like, it's always talked about they got to build the chemistry, they got to build the timing, they got to learn the playbook, they got to learn the language. Defense, it's kind of almost universal how you play defense for a lot of systems. Sometimes the language is a little bit different, but position on the field is the same, tackling still the same. It's not like receivers where they have to run different routes. They got to know when the angle that the
Mhm.
quarterback is throwing the football, where he wants them to be, lining up, and all those things. There's the offense is always having to start a little bit harder because they got to work just a little bit more to get everything to get in sync. And I do think we saw a lot of offenses not in sync because no one was working. Actually, I recently saw Nick Arbuckle put out a video of him working out with some CFL players. I think they're all in California right now. They're all on different teams. They're not all on the same team, but they're working out. They're working together. Some of them are, there are some teammates together, but this is stuff that they weren't able to do during the pandemic. They weren't able to just go to a football field and throw, especially quarterbacks, and especially up here in Canada. The Canadians, I think, were the ones that were hit hardest by this pandemic and what they were able to do.
Well, yeah, a lot of the gyms were closed even, and then you can't go outside. That was a problem too. The other thing you mentioned about the pandemic, specific to here, because I can speak best on it, there were so many restrictions. Most of the time, the players had to have meetings individually by Zoom. So the only time they'd see the guy or even knew who he was is when they'd run on the field for practice. That was it. That just doesn't build team chemistry. And nobody's fault. It's the rules they were living under, but it clearly had an impact, I can say for sure, on the Calgary Stampeders. No contact versus contact. It was two different halves, and you can almost look at their season and figure out when they could start to visit with each other.
I can use two words why I think offense is harder to put together. With offense, you have to initiate. With defense, you have to react. And the
Yeah.
reaction is natural. The reaction is it's on the player more than it is with the offense. The offense, you all have to be on the same page. With a
Yep.
defense, it's reactionary.
I agree totally.
No, definitely. No, I think, and defensive players get a little, they get very defensive when you say that too. They're like, oh, it's not as easy as you think. But I've seen
It's not
teams,
about easy though, right?
no,
It's
but
not easy.
I've seen teams add, a defensive back late in the season, and that guy then becomes their starting defensive back. You rarely see a team add a receiver so late that he can be an impact player. There's only certain few, like a Duke Williams. Like those are like there's only a select few that are talented enough to pick it up right away. Most guys, it takes time and reps.
And he had Canadian Football League experience, Williams too, and that makes a big difference. So he at least had a sense of the terminology and what defenses do. Not 100%, of course, because he was with a different team, but certainly that CFL experience made a difference.
Anybody who understands the game of football, anybody, I mean anybody, understands the last thing anybody who understands the game of football is going to call a football player not very bright. Because no matter what side of the ball they're on or whether they're on special teams, there is a lot of thinking that needs to be done. And I use two words initiate, but you have to think to initiate right in tandem with others. And as far as being a defender and reacting, you have to have experience in understanding what you're looking at because you have to know the big picture. And out of that big picture, you got to pick out one little idea that you're going to have because your feet can only go one direction or one place, So that to me is a dog that won't hunt. No one should. There is no such thing as an unintelligent football player. They all have to be intelligent. They have playbooks. Just grab a playbook one day, folks. Just go out there and grab a playbook and tell yourself how smart you are. You'll figure it out right away. No, that to me, that's something that I scoff at, and I'm sorry to the people that I scoff at about that. But football players, they need to use their brain. There is a lot of thinking involved in being a football player. Now, maybe it's not the kind of thinking that allows somebody to operate on someone's brain, but how many people can do
It's,
that? So
yeah, it's the skills they need for the task at hand. So
absolutely, and you have to know how to do it. All right, so we agree that offenses this year might look better, and keying in, you talked about a quarterback in particular, David and Mark. You have a great quarterback there in Calgary. Wonderful quarterback, Bo Levi Mitchell. The way he's had to be a quarterback these past couple of years, aside from the injuries, which is a big encumbrance on being successful. I think this affects good quarterbacks because they need time as much as Bo Levi Mitchell says, and I've heard him say and heard people say that he said it. The simple thing that he says is, okay, just run down the field as fast as you can. That's part of what he believes, but there's more to it. It's more nuanced than just running fast down the field. Quarterback needs time with his receivers,
and
and to your
that's
point,
just what I was going to say. Yeah, just what I was going to say is there's a lot more than that. In order to be able to go back and have the time to launch it downfield, the other 11 guys or most of the guys have to contribute as well. And as you say, is maintaining the pocket, having maybe other receivers run decoys to move guys off their spaces. So yeah, it may look like a guy just took off at 100 miles an hour, and that's how it ends up being successful. But in between the ball's release and the catch, there's a lot that's gone on.
the other thing that football needs, David, is osmosis. A lot of what the football players do, know, and understand and execute has to do with osmosis, to Mr. Stevens' point, where being in the same room matters. because it's one thing to have a conversation here like we're having right now, but it's linear. It's a linear conversation, but one that's nuanced in it with a group of guys, where you're in the room with them, even in the quarterback room, which is limited. That conversation sinks much more readily than it does over Zoom.
Yeah, and you don't the connection's different, right? We've tried our best throughout all this to make this seem like what should be the normal, but then you see somebody in person and you talk to them, it's just totally different, right? Because there's just something about that face to face interaction that you just is just so hard to replace. And look, these Zoom conferences, where guys have to have, presentations up, they have to have, guys may want to ask questions, but they don't want to interrupt in a Zoom, or there's a bunch of guys who have a question, they're talking over each other. At least in a setting where you're all in the same room, is a little more organization involved with it. And how about you? But staring at a screen for God knows how long those meetings go, the human brain can only accept so much through a screen, especially when some guys may not have the technology to have the best viewing experience. I mean, hate to say it, but you see some of these players who are doing like Zoom calls where they go on a show and they're using their phones. I don't know about you. I hate watching anything on my phone like that because it's just so small. Your attention's not really totally there. Versus if you're in a room, you're free of all distraction. Your mind is just on the person that's talking, and maybe they have like a whiteboard or something, or they're showing something on a screen there. Versus you're on a phone, you get a text message, you see a little pop up somewhere. It's not totally easy to just free yourself of all distractions when you're doing these Zoom meetings.
What was Zoom 3 years ago?
It would have been like Skype. Like
Nothing.
Nothing. The point I'll only the only
Oh,
small point I want you to jump in, Mark. The only small point I'll make is that not only did we have to learn how to live with the pandemic, we had to learn how to work with the pandemic, and everybody's working differently. And football players and teams, it's even like it's one thing to have an office meeting or do this, what we're doing, but it's another thing when you're having a nuanced meeting. By nuanced, I mean, like you alluded, David, there's so much more going on that peripheral vision comes in handy, which is useless on Zoom.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we were doing our interviews with players on Zoom. Not every player could see you because in the Argos case, they had a separate camera set up and then they had the tablet kind of off to the side in some cases and they can't see you. They have no idea who they're talking to. You're just a voice to them. And when you can see the person that's asking the question, and in some cases you can stare right into their soul to see to really know how you're responding to the question. I just think that connection, like, it's so valued, and you just lose a little bit of the luster if you're doing this over electronics versus you can kind of have a little bit of a more personable relationship when you're seeing the person and able to just communicate in a way you just normally can't on video calls.
Take it
totally
take
agree.
it take it a different way, Mark. I'll ask it this way. You're doing an interview on Zoom and you're doing a scrum. Which brings out the best as far as you're concerned and why?
What brings out the best is
Best
one on
answers.
one
The
with the
best.
guy.
Okay, one on one.
But
But on
yeah,
Zoom
out
or
of
in
those two
person?
options,
On Zoom
probably
or
a
in
scrum
person?
situation. Yeah, probably
I,
I'd
I
rather
didn't
be in
mean to. I
person.
didn't mean to make it a competition between scrums
Yeah.
and one on one. I'll rephrase my question. The point is, which is more effective for, in your opinion, for the viewer, listener, reader, when
A
a
scrum.
reporter is one on one with the or a scrum? In other words, in person interviews as opposed to Zoom interviews.
Totally. Yeah. Because when you get a sort of a feel for what the guy's thinking when you're side by side with him too, if his actions match his words kind of thing. So that's what I would prefer. The other thing about Zoom too, and it became a bit of an issue that you know, outlets that normally come to the stadium and they would get the story at the same time as those of us that are there every day. So is that a bit of ego? Maybe, I don't know, but It was frustrating at times. I can't lie to you that you'd have something in mind, and all of a sudden everybody knows it.
Oh, I just became a member. Never mind. I just became a member of the union of reporters at the Grey Cup. And to put it simply, I think also, there's no proprietary control by the people who do the hard work, as you said, of being there. Now, this is not me showing resentment for people who are looking over my
Oh
shoulder.
yeah.
I'm at every game and I'm doing interviews every game and I'm there every game. And then somebody can go on the internet, watch my interview, and they can benefit from the work that I do, which writers, reporters who are at the games on a regular basis, TV, radio, whomever, they work really hard and they really get to know what's going on. It's great that we're helping other people get information, but it kind of takes away from, you know, feeling like, you have not only responsibility, which David and I, we take it as a serious responsibility, but for some reason we're not getting the credit for the information that's out there, and that kind of hurts a little, right?
Yeah, it's not so much, every once in a while, obviously some people will get the same story at the same time, and I totally understand that, but it's became a fallback position for some people that didn't have to pay that much attention. Just hit record and you'll get everything you need. So that was the issue, and hopefully that's gone out. But I mean, I do understand from a team perspective, they needed to get these people, into as many television studios and everything as much as possible to have their words exposed as much as possible. So I think what we're going to end up with is, once this is all done, and we have to get the collective agreement signed and the players can do what they're told they can do. But I think you'll see a bit of a hybrid. It'll still be far more in person, but maybe every few days they'll do something on Zoom, because in the case of Calgary, most people are mostly at the practices, but not every outlet's at every practice. So you don't want to lose out on that exposure.
Or even road trips. I think that's always become a tough one.
Mhm.
Um, but on top of that, the other thing I don't like about these video Zoom calls sometimes, you have one person who's got perfect audio, perfect everything.
Yeah.
And you got the other person where, first off, you couldn't hear the question, so players are like, "Could you repeat that?" You lose a little bit of that rhythm of the scrum, and also fans should be clamoring for the best quality content that they can consume, and Zoom doesn't always provide that. I mean, our thing that we do right now, much better than what you would get on a Zoom call. I'll tell you that much.
No, that's fair. And it's asking both players and team communication staff to be, electronics and engineer experts too, which they aren't always, which is understandable. It's not part of it. So, yeah, we had a lot of that too, where, or if a guy's leaning back and talking quietly or softly, who tells him to lean forward? By the time you relay it to the communications manager, the guy's gone or something. So it's just an awkward situation for sure.
Yeah, you're right. When I'm standing there with a microphone, if the player leans back, I can push the microphone to where I can keep the
Follow him.
microphone
Yeah.
within 6 to 8 inches from his mouth. He can move, he can rock. I've had players like that. I've had players that step back 5 or 10, maybe 20, 15 feet when they're in the middle of an interview and you have to follow them. But the point is, with Zoom, I think the problem with Zoom is, and I know this is probably, counterintuitive if you're the team. The players now are not insulated when they do their one-on-one interviews, whether it's a one-on-one or a scrum in person, where it is a question, no pause, another question, no pause, another question, no pause, a follow-up. And so the players don't have the opportunity to control what they're going to say. Now, I understand it's important that everybody has a right to make sure they feel comfortable during an interview, but I think with Zoom they become too comfortable, and then we lose that edge to the answers, Mark. When you record and then edit the answers, I think when you're doing a scrum or in person, there seems to be a little more emotion, passion in the players' words and the way they deliver it.
Totally agree. I totally agree. And, they're in a comfortable, almost a studio setting, living close to a living room setting and that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you totally.
And sometimes the best interviews are the ones where the player, quite frankly, not that, not, I want to make this clear, not that players are trying to be dishonest. That isn't the point. The point is they're less insulated. And when they're less insulated, that means they tend to tell the truth. And nobody here, as long as reporters, whether it be radio, television, even podcasters like myself or people like David and yourself, we're not there to trap guys. Most of us aren't looking there to be a problem for a guy or looking for a gotcha moment. We have guys like that in the industry. We have guys and gals like that do stories, but we're not all like that. We actually want the raw. What I'm looking for when I do an interview is the raw emotion of the player, what he's thinking, and how what he's thinking affects what he's going to do or did. That's what I want to know.
Totally agree. I'm with you. Yeah, I don't think the CFL. I don't think there's too many players that have had real contentious relationships through the years. I'm sure there's some that don't like some of the questions, but that's life being in the spotlight.
There's nothing
But I don't
wrong
think
with
it's a
it
problem.
as long as it's like anything else, right? I mean, we've seen maybe I shouldn't name names, but I'll put it this way: I've seen coaches who get very testy at certain reporters before the reporter finishes asking the question. I've heard this a million times. Yeah, I expected that kind of question from you. You know, and they're
Yeah.
entertaining. They're entertaining to a degree, but you can see it's counterproductive to what we're there trying to do. So when you find yourself in that position, I think as a reporter, you can keep pushing if you want, if you think the result is worth it. But I don't find myself either trying or I hope I never get in that position, because the last thing I want to do is antagonize the interviewer, the interviewed. That's not the kind of interview
Mhm.
I want to do. I want to expose the game, the players, and what they think of what they accomplished that day. Like I said, today, tomorrow, and whatever, looking down the road. Have you ever had a problem with have a question not land the way you intended?
Oh
Oh yeah.
yeah, from time to time, they don't like the approach, but I'd say it's the exception, not the rule, though. That somebody thought it was a little too sharp edged about what was happening. But in general, no, I would say there haven't been too many problems. But I haven't had anybody walk away on me. I've had a few one-word answers. That's another method of expressing their displeasure, but no real serious issues. No.
So, and we always talk about how great the players are to interview. How do you think? How do you think this season's going to look? One thing I noticed at the Grey Cup, um, the players are really glad to be there. Sincerely glad to just be there, and not to suggest that they're not glad to be there at any other Grey Cup. They're always happy to be at the Grey Cup. But I found them this year, because of the Grey Cup, the circumstances that they're in, the game meant more. Their personal
Hmm.
experience meant more. There seemed to be more of that. There was that aura around the game where it was a personal experience by the players, and I think by the media too. I know from my end, it was very personal. It was a very personal Grey Cup, in my opinion.
I'll talk to people in person, even though there was a bit of a moat there, but it was overall pretty good. Much better, much better than anything we'd experienced all season long.
David?
So
And
that's why I liked it.
it was fun to see how many players were happy to see us in person, to do these in person. I think that goes to show, and I think our best interviews of the season came during Grey Cup because players weren't limited. There was a time limit in terms of how long each group was out there, but players didn't feel like, all right, few questions and you're done. It was a little more informal, and they felt more relaxed. They felt no, they didn't feel like, again, the screen aspect. I think kind of it's not for everybody because you're kind of put on view. You're on the front stage. Not all
Yeah.
players like that. Doing these scrums, yes, some of them had cameras and bright lights, but they also had us there to kind of help them, guide them through it as well, versus they kind of maybe feel on their own if they're not doing it in person as well.
No, very fair. I'm sure they enjoyed seeing people too, instead of these disembodied voices coming out of somewhere in a room hundreds of feet away, which is what it was in many cases this year.
Yeah, the,
So,
the live aspect again, David. To your point as well. I think the players felt that they could expand on what they're trying to say. Where in a Zoom call, I think they also are forced to look at the clock And when you're looking at the clock, you're editing on the fly, and that never makes things, as you said, David, they're comfortable. They're comfortable because they can complete their thought without being concerned about taking too much time. And again, that's just another reason why in-person interviews are so much better than Zoom ones.
Oh, I will glad look, I'll do it if I have no problem if the person is nowhere near, like, we had to do with Andrew Harris because he was still in Winnipeg. He wasn't even in Toronto yet. Like that makes sense. If we want to get to him right away, this is the easiest and quickest way to do it. But when you have, let's say we had all those defensive players in that one Zoom call. That not only did it take so long because we had to go through 5 players, and it was kind of the questions were coming all over the place. So at least then, if you're doing these in person, you can have a little more organized to it. Not everybody wants to ask a certain guy a question. They may want to talk to someone else. So you can organize something that's a little bit more time efficient as well. Because I say these Zoom calls were taking longer because you have to wait for the next guy, right? You have to they had to get themselves set up, and then not everyone had a question for that one, but then they're waiting for someone to come and they got a million questions for that person. So that many aspects that come into the adjustments. They did their best. It wasn't the end of the world, but we already know that when we get that in-person experience, it's so much better, and it's always hard to go back it's always easier to go back to what works versus what wasn't ideal.
Because you'd wait, and there might be a list of players that come in, but a couple you don't have any occasion to talk to. But you had to
Yeah,
sit there and listen and wait for your guy to come up in the rotation, whenever that was. So
yeah,
just one
yeah.
of those things.
Yeah, no, well, this is an experience. This is an experience. We never had the experience where we had to rely on Zoom. We didn't know what Zoom was. But now we're going to have a chance. This conversation we're having, David, we're all going to be able to figure it out because hopefully we go back to the way things were, and we're going to get a really good idea what the difference is. Because we were shocked by going from scrums to no scrums. Now we're waiting for for scrums, right? So now our brains are ready. I'm ready to see if my thinking is right. Like with this conversation we're having right now, it's based on what the experience at the Grey Cup. Now I don't think it's going to be any different. Maybe the level of intensity might be a little lower because it won't be the Grey Cup. And the next time we're doing something, it might be in training camp or a post game of a, like you said, like the game you're looking forward to, a preseason game. We'll get a chance maybe to talk to players right beside them and get a chance to, as an individual, this is the other thing that, and this is selfish on my part, and for the viewers who don't do interviews, it's great to have a player on your own that you can ask more than one question to and a follow-up and go down a path with them. And I know for a reporter like yourself, you really need to do that because that's how you build your story, right?
Totally. Yeah. Couldn't have said it any better. That's the approach we want to take, and it wasn't available. So hopefully it is this year.
I think it will be. David, why don't we talk to him about the West and how the West looks from a Westerner's perspective? Here in the East, we've been watching how Ottawa they brought in a new GM, and this GM has been overactive, especially if you put it in the context of previous Red Black regimes. The past few years, the Red Blacks have done very little, whether it be in free agency or bringing players in. It seemed like they had problems, didn't appear to be solving them. There's a different GM there. Hamilton still has the great regime that they have there. Montreal is an owner that is intent on winning. They have 2 CFL quarterbacks there. Every team in the East seems to be like no other year, equal, but not equal in the sense of they're all equal because they're all just not good enough to win more games than they lose. This is a year, from your perspective, where I think that this is a year where the East is going to earn their 3 playoff spots and even maybe have to fight for a 4th one, and they might have the ability to do it. Does the East look stronger this year than you can recall in past memory?
I'd say top to bottom, yes. And, Ottawa was ultra aggressive in the free agent market. Toronto was as well, although they had to let a guy go the other day for salary cap reasons. But, they looked very, they were 9-5. Let's remember only one team won more games than the Argos. They were very good. Hamilton was good, but not great. Montreal is the wild card for me. They were too talented to be 7-7 last year, 500. I don't know what happened there. I'm not sure about all of Ottawa's free agents, but they certainly have been aggressive. So let's see how it comes together. So, I would probably put Toronto on top right now based on what I've seen and what they've done, and then sort it out from there. And Montreal's my wild card team. I just don't know where they're going to go.
This might be the first year that I can actually say without, you know, not look you in the eye. This might be the year where I
Mhm.
can say there won't be a crossover.
No, well, it wasn't last year either, so
I know, but
no, I don't.
last year we weren't sure, like we are. Like this year,
Yeah,
I'm just saying that the East is trending better. They're better
yep.
this year than they were last year, and better last year than they were the year before that. And how much do you think that'll help the Canadian Football League? Because I believe that a strong league, and by strong league I mean every team having a higher percentage of good teams will stand the league in better stead, and you'll have more turnstiles turning.
I agree with you. They had two teams that really struggled last year, and that was Ottawa and Edmonton. And we saw at the end in Edmonton that the folks were not impressed at all. So, uh, you know,
And
empty stadium.
so the East, you agree, looks strong. Out West, you guys see the East as being more of a threat this
Yep,
year than it's been in past
yep,
years.
yeah,
What
very
about
much
it?
so.
Go ahead. Yeah, very much so. Go ahead. You can
But
continue.
I was just gonna say, but I think right now the way it looks, anyway, I'd probably put Toronto on top with Hamilton breathing down their neck. So that's where I
Yeah,
have it right here.
I'm not at this point. I'm not really worried about which team finishes first. I'm looking forward, and I'm hoping. I'm pulling for the fact that none of the teams will have a lock on first. That'll be a battle right to the end of the season. I think we really need that in the Canadian Football League. I think we need that mostly in the East, where we're being carried by Hamilton alone. Ottawa was having problems, Montreal was having problems. To your point, Montreal could have been a lot better. They ended up with a quarterback injury, which hurt them.
Oh yeah.
Toronto's been really good, and they, we've got 3 out of 4 teams here that need better attendance. You don't have that issue in the West. The most you could say about the West is BC maybe struggling a little bit at the gate, but all the other teams, including Edmonton, which you talked about, does Edmonton looks as well as they've made a serious move to leave behind the terrible seasons that they've had in the recent past.
Boy, they sure cleaned house, didn't they? They didn't
Yep.
waste any time. It was the Monday or so after the season. Everybody was let go. But, people that I know there say, I mean, I don't know what they announced for the crowds, but that actual in stadium, there was about 8 or 9,000 for a game in Edmonton. Are you kidding me? Then the contrast was so obvious that a few days later, they had those two soccer games with 48,000. Now I get it, a national team versus your home city team is a little different, and having a hometown player scheduled to play, Alfonso Davies. The point I'm trying to make, though, is the wheels really fell off in Edmonton, and I'll give them credit, they didn't hesitate. They went in there and made the moves.
Floor to ceiling.
Yeah, very much so. So, and Chris Jones does, I don't think that was universally beloved, his hiring. But nonetheless, he does have a very good record. He can turn a team around, and let's see what he does there because it's going to be a monumental task for sure.
Well, sometimes a partnership with the devil is better than going to hell, right? And I think essentially that's the difference that Edmonton has to and their fans have to realize. And I think the reality is, do you want to win or do you want to like the guy that helps you win? I think Edmonton fans are no different than any other fans on the planet.
I think that's
Win,
fair. Yeah,
please.
I think that's very fair, and that's why I think Jones' coaching resume speaks for itself. It's
Absolutely.
once he gets outside the confines of the uh, you know stadium and running the team that there's controversy. So.
Yeah, the only problem I think that what because I saw a couple of the interviews with him, and I think when he said something like this, I can't quote him word for word, but I'm here for the long haul. I want to be just like, and he named a couple of names in the Canadian Football League, one in Calgary and one in BC that was in BC, and you could hear the report, you could hear a pin drop because I could hear I could hear tongues being bitten because, that's the one thing when he said that. That's the one thing that Edmonton fans and people in Edmonton are going to have. They're going to say, "Okay, you're going to be here forever." Well, I tell you what, you got my support this year. Because ultimately that's what the Edmonton fans. I think it's what it's going to come down to. If you look at people being people and fans being fans, they're going to trust him as long as he's there this year and hope for the best.
He can say what he wants, and maybe in his heart of heart he believes it, but his track record says he won't be there for the full 4 years. Maybe all times have changed now. I don't know. His track record does not indicate long-term stability in one place, so I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, but his track record is based on the fact that he had hopes and aspirations to move, to the NFL and to bigger and better things. And he had this is something that we've had a few people who are in the Canadian Football League. David, you know this too, that we've had football players that have gone to the US, played in the US, and decided they come back to Canada and go, you know what? I don't mind holding the clipboard, or I don't mind sitting on the sidelines. I don't mind that it's a big league and the greatest football league in the world, but there's something about the CFL and there's something about the game here that makes me feel good about being here. We've heard those stories too, and maybe Chris Jones felt a little bit of that. I don't know. I hope so. Anyway,
I also think the pressure, right? In the NFL, there's so much money involved in performance. CFL, yes, their expectations are high, but you're not giving these guys millions of dollars to perform, especially now with the management cap and the salary cap. So yeah, I think the lifestyle of being in the CFL definitely less intense than in the NFL. And for guys, especially in the later stages of their career, they definitely appreciate that more because not only do they get to play to win for championships, they make a living doing it, and in some cases they get a better life for their family. You hear a lot of players that decide, I want to make Canada my home because this is a better spot for my family to grow up. And that's I think something the CFL can hang their hat on in many ways, and I think right now what they're trying to do is how can we make it even better for our current players to get more opportunities so that if they want to stay up here, they can stay up here.
Good point, and many have in many cities for sure, for many of the reasons you said. I mean, everybody in the CFL, if you play here for any length of time, is going to require a second career. As long as you're comfortable with that, then why not?
well, every football player everywhere, their adulthood, not their life, because that in itself maybe confuses the situation. But in one's adult life, when they look towards being an adult and their independence and no reliance on others or less reliance on others and more independence, the independent adult life is not that much as a football player. 10, 12 years. If a
Nope.
person lives till they're 70, there's 50 years that their life has stuff going on with it. They live to 70, let's say. God bless you if you do. I'm sorry if you don't. Um, that's you're talking 20 years max for football players, but we know it's around maybe 5, 8, 10 years for most football players. So it's a small part of their life. So when they come here and play football, they're not talking about their life. They're talking about a segment of their life that includes the desire to play the game. And I think for the most part, it's not about money. It's not about money, Mark.
No, because the amounts are, compared to a 3 or 4 year NFL veteran, are pretty modest. Like Alex Singleton, who played here for 3 years, just for some reason, Philadelphia let him go, and he went to Denver, and the minimum, given his time of service that Denver could sign him for, was $1 million. So that's the kind of money you're talking about. And
Absolutely.
he's a good player, but he's not superstar Hall of Fame. He's very, very good. But you're just talking about the big money there, yeah, for sure.
Well, when you say very good, he was the captain on he was one of the captains on the
Yeah,
defense.
yeah, and a top
So,
10 in
he was the
tacklers.
leader.
So yeah, top 10 in NFL tackles as well. So
Exactly.
strange move,
So,
but he got some money, and he'll make a lot more based on bonuses and roster and stuff like that. So wouldn't be hard for him to make a couple $1 million this upcoming season.
yeah. So if money's your objective, needless to say, you're going to go to the NFL. But if you you know, sometimes, like I said, there's a decision that has to be made by an individual where they accept the reality that either I sit on the sidelines in the NFL or I go to the CFL and play. I've gone to college. I've got a great education. I can make a decent living. I just want to play a few more years of football. and I want to be on the field. So I make the
Yeah.
decision that I'm putting myself in the player's head here. And it's partly assumption, but partly education too. I'd rather play a few years in the CFL, get that opportunity to play in the lights, play for a championship, get my name on a trophy, and and then I can move on with the rest of my life. It isn't football is a life when you're in it, but eventually it's not very forgiving. It's it doesn't football's a business and that's all you are. You're part of a business. And unfortunately, time does catch up to you and you can't you
Yeah.
can't win that argument.
Well, I know one Stampeder after the first two practices, all these young guys come in, they're all excited. They've made the team. He'd call them over to a meeting and say, "So what are your plans after your career?" These guys would look at him. What do you mean? I've just been here. He said it could end at any time. Get planning. So it's kind of
Yes,
interesting.
yes. Well, that's again, it's because they're just thinking about being on the field, I guess. And then I have to, I guess, also acknowledge and I don't mean to offend players, but they never, because it's true, they never give up the dream. And even the ones who say they have no intention of going back to the NFL, I think there's a few that are thinking they are. They just don't want to jinx their opportunity. So it's an unforgiving business. It's totally unforgiving. It's not. It's definitely not loyal. There's a loyalty's one way. That's the way football is. Um, but the game is great, and we've talked about four downs. We all agree that's silly. Why even have that conversation? We've talked about Zoom calls and how they're not as good as personal interviews doing with the players. Let's talk about the game itself outside of the rules. What to you, Mark, will if the CFL has a great year, what do you see the reason it'll be a great year?
Well, first to get through with no off-field issues, because that's something we have to consider, that there isn't any flare-up again of COVID. That would be number one. Number two, that attendance returns to very close to pre-COVID levels, because obviously the league can't afford to go backwards after two very punishing years. Those would be things, maybe an upset. A Grey Cup team comes kind of out of nowhere, builds a great story. I don't know who that team would be, but certainly be a lot of fun. And somebody go into Regina and take the Grey Cup and have it presented to a team other than the Rough Riders there. So that'd be a lot of fun. So those would be some of the things I'd be looking for.
And now your team, Calgary. How do you see your team if it makes it to the Grey Cup? What's it going to take for them to get to the Grey Cup?
Well, first, a full season from Bo Levi Mitchell, healthy. I think he is. I think he'll be there. I think they had to do a few different things. Their season was basically a big divide, 2-5 the first half, 6-1 the second. I think they could have won the playoff game in Saskatchewan and given Winnipeg a real push, but they didn't. That's credit those two teams. So if they get the receivers on, track the way they can, they've got Kamar Jordan coming back, Reggie Begelton. You talk about players that, tried to roll the dice with the NFL situation. He just said, this isn't for me. I want to be a Stampeder. So he's there. Same thing with Trey Roberson, did the exact same thing. So, I could see them. They've got a couple of holes in the secondary they'll have to fill. They did a ratio changing trade to acquire Cameron Judge, but I see them as a very stable all round team with very few obvious glaring holes to fill right now. And Kadeem Carey, I think, is going to take the league by storm. He had a great year last year, 835 yards. I think he's poised for a big breakout season this year. So will the Stampeders win it? I don't know. I'm not going to go there just yet, but they won't be too far from the top as far as I'm concerned.
Give you the last minute, David.
No, I thought Calgary, despite their slow start and the Bo Levi Mitchell injury, I thought they really impressed me of how they kind of changed their kind of culture a little bit, in that they weren't a pass heavy team going down the stretch. They relied more on the Kadeem Carey. I think they realized they need to play to their strengths a little bit more and not trying to force the old Calgary to win. And I think if they're able to adapt, that's going to make them a much better team going into the season.
And
but Winnipeg, I'd still admit they're the favorites until somebody can haul them down. So
yeah. And I'll say in the last few seconds we have is I hope the offenses are rediscovered in all the cities, because the CFL is about offense. It's always been the tagline, hashtag
Mhm.
game's never over. No lead is safe. Hopefully we'll get back to that and see what three downs can do, and motion and all that stuff, and see talented players that we have in the Canadian Football League do what they're best at doing, and hopefully we'll provide them with the opportunity. The league and the fans and the teams will provide them with the opportunity to show us how glorious the Canadian Football League can be. Mark, I really appreciate you doing this.
Good to talk football in mid-March. We're kind of at that midpoint of the off season. A little
Yep,
bit of review of last year, but now we can get ready for next year.
absolutely. David, as usual, I thank you so much.
Always happy to talk football and CFL.
And thank you, of course, to Mark Steven and David Morassutti. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk, airing Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For CFL Talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.